"You don't flirt with men like me," said the mafia boss. She thought he was just a hot photographer. Elena Carter's feet were murdering her. She shifted her weight. The cheap, non-slip soles of her black catering shoes squeaking almost imperceptibly on the polished marble. Around her. The rooftop gala was in full swing. It was only 9 o'clock, but the New York City air was already thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, confident hum of old money. Glass flutes of champagne floated by on trays, reflecting the glittering skyline like 1,000 captured stars. At 27, Elena felt 100. This was the third double shift she had pulled this week, one at the diner and one with the catering company. She mentally calculated the tips, subtracting her bus pass, her rent, and the impossibly large payment for her brother Nathan's physical therapy. It was never enough. The numbers blurred in her head, leaving only the familiar, cold knot of anxiety in her stomach. She navigated the crowd, her smile as starched and stiff as her white uniform blouse. "More champagne, sir?" A man in a tuxedo waved her off without looking. She was invisible. A functioning, moving piece of furniture. That was the job. A vibration in her apron pocket made her jump. She didn't need to look. It was Sean. "The 10th text tonight. Where are you? I know you're lying about working. Are you with him?" Her ex was a persistent ghost, haunting her phone, her front stoop, her life. The knot in her stomach tightened. She forced the vibration, and the man attached to it, from her mind. "Watch it," someone muttered. Elena spun, her tray wobbling. She had backed directly into a solid wall of a man. Champagne flutes shivered, but years of waitressing kept them upright. "I am so sorry," she breathed, stabilizing the tray. "I wasn't looking where I was going." She looked up, and the apology died on her lips. He was tall, dressed in a black suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed to absorb the light around him. It was a stark, severe contrast to the glittering guests. He held a camera, a heavy, professional-looking one, and he hadn't been looking at the party. He had been aiming his lens at the chaotic sprawl of the city below. But now, he was looking at her. His eyes were the first thing she truly registered. They were not just dark, they were cold, like the river water far below. Yet, there was an intensity, a magnetic pull that held her static. He was devastatingly handsome, but not in the soft, curated way of the men around them. His face was all sharp angles, a strong jaw, a straight nose, a mouth that looked like it had never formed an easy smile. He didn't say, "It's fine." He didn't say anything. He just watched her, his gaze assessing, moving from her flushed cheeks to the way her fingers gripped the tray. The silence stretched. Elena, fueled by exhaustion, stress, and a sudden reckless impulse to feel like a person rather than a servant, broke it. "Are you the event photographer?" she asked, adjusting her tray. One dark eyebrow raised, just a fraction. "I'm guessing you're not here for the canapés," she continued, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "You seem to be the only other person here who looks like they're actually working." A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, passed through those cold eyes. He lowered the camera, letting it hang from the thick strap around his neck. His presence was overwhelming. "I'm capturing the subject," he said. His voice was low, a deep rumble with a slight gravelly texture that vibrated right through her. "The party?" she asked, glancing at the laughing, oblivious crowd. "The pretense," he replied, his gaze returning to her. Elena laughed, a short, honest sound that surprised even her. "Well, you've got plenty of material here. Trying to capture the soul of the city, or just the expensive jewelry?" He took a step closer. Not into her personal space, but enough to make the bustling rooftop fade into a dull roar. The air between them suddenly felt charged, thin. She could smell his cologne, not a cloud of scent, but a subtle, clean trace of sandalwood and something metallic, like rain on pavement. "I find honesty more interesting," he said, his eyes tracing the line of her jaw. "Then you must be very bored tonight," Elena said, her voice dropping to match his. She should be moving. She should be serving champagne. But she was rooted to the spot. "I was," he admitted, "until 2 minutes ago." Her heart did a stupid, jarring flip. This was flirting. She, Elena Carter, covered in stress and probably a light sheen of sweat, was flirting with the most intimidating, beautiful man she had ever seen. The danger of it was a thrill, a brief, bright escape from Sean and the hospital bills. And what's the assessment now? Waitress in a monkey suit, desperate for tips? She challenged. Woman who would rather be anywhere else, he corrected softly. Woman who thinks this is all a ridiculous performance and who is probably right. He knew. He saw right through the uniform, right past the professional smile. He saw her. The intimacy of that observation stole her breath. You get all that from one look, she whispered. I'm a good photographer, he said. His lips quirked. Not quite a smile, but a shadow of one. I see what's underneath. His gaze dropped to her mouth. The air crackled. She felt the heat of his body, the sheer, solid presence of him. He was all quiet power and coiled stillness. He leaned in, just an inch. Elena's breath hitched. She watched his mouth, imagining what it would feel like. She leaned in, too. A tiny, involuntary movement. He stopped. The warmth vanished, replaced by that sudden, Arctic cold. He straightened, his expression shuddering, becoming impenetrable. He looked at her as if he'd just remembered something crucial, something that placed a chasm of reinforced steel between them. You don't flirt with men like me, he said. The words were not a suggestion. They were a flat, final statement of fact. Before she could process the sting, the confusion, the sudden loss, he turned. He didn't excuse himself. He just walked away, melting back into the shadows and the crowd, leaving Elena standing alone, her tray suddenly feeling impossibly heavy, her heart hammering against her ribs with a strange mix of disappointment and fear. It was past 2 a.m. when the catering van finally dropped her off. Her apartment building in Queens was a stark contrast to the gleaming high-rise she'd just left. The lobby light was broken again, and the stairwell smelled faintly of old garbage and bleach. Elena climbed the 3 flights, her legs aching. All she wanted was to fall into bed and sleep for a week. She fumbled in her pocket for her keys, her mind replaying that bizarre, intense conversation on the roof. You don't flirt with men like me. What did that even mean? A snob? Married? Just arrogant? Took you long enough. Elena froze, her key halfway to the lock. Sean stepped out from the shadowy landing below hers. He was wearing the same faded hoodie he'd worn for 3 days, and his eyes were bloodshot. Sean, you can't be here, she said, her voice trembling with exhaustion and a sudden spike of adrenaline. I told you to leave me alone. You told me. He scoffed, taking a step up. But you've been ignoring my texts. Working, you said. You think you're too good for me now? Working those rich parties? It's a job. Sean, go home. She turned back to her door, her hands shaking so badly she couldn't get the key in the lock. He was on her in a second. He grabbed her wrist, his grip painfully tight. Don't walk away from me. We're not done. You're mine. Elena, you think some rich guy is going to look at you? You're nothing without me. Let go of me, she hissed, trying to pull her arm back. The desperation, the smell of stale beer on his breath, it made her skin crawl. It's over. Let me go. We're done when I say we're done. He snarled, yanking her arm harder, pulling her away from the door. A sound echoed from the street below, the quiet, solid thunk of a heavy car door closing. Sean paused, glancing over the railing. Who the hell is that? Elena looked, too, her heart seizing. A black sedan, long and sleek and utterly out of place on their street, was parked at the curb. It was the only car on the block that wasn't at least 10 years old and rusting. A figure emerged from the driver's side. Even in the dim, flickering orange of the streetlights, she knew him. The suit was gone, replaced by dark trousers and a dark Henley that clung to a frame that was all hard lines and muscle. It was the photographer. He didn't look up. He just started walking toward the building entrance. He moved with a silent, measured purpose that was far more terrifying than Sean's desperate bluster. Sean, still gripping Elena's wrist, squinted into the dark. What, is that him? Is that the guy you've been... The front door of the building opened. The sound of heavy, calm footsteps started on the stairs. They didn't rush. They didn't hesitate. Just a steady, relentless thud, thud, thud. Sean's bravado faltered. He let go of Elena's arm, instinctively stepping back. The man appeared at the turning of the landing. Luca Moretti stopped 5 steps below them. He didn't look at Elena, who was pressed against her apartment door, breathing hard. His entire terrifying focus was on Sean. He stood perfectly still. He didn't speak. He didn't raise his hands. He just watched. The temperature on the landing seemed to drop 20 degrees. The air became thick, heavy, charged with a level of menace Elena had only ever seen in movies. This was not a man. This was a predator. Sean, who always postured as the toughest guy in the room, seemed to shrink. He visibly paled. I was just talking to her, Sean stammered. Luca's gaze flickered, just once, to the red, angry marks on Elena's wrist where Sean had gripped her. Then his eyes snapped back to Sean's face. Still, he said nothing. The silence was absolute, a crushing weight. Sean couldn't take it. He saw something in those cold eyes that shattered his nerve completely. "I'm going," Sean said, his voice cracking. I'm going." He scrambled past Luca, taking the stairs 2 at a time, nearly tripping in his haste to get away. The front door slammed shut, and the sound of his running footsteps faded into the night. Elena was left alone on the landing with the man from the gala. She was trembling, her entire body shaking from the adrenaline. He finally looked at her. His face was an unreadable mask of cold control. He assessed her, his gaze checking her for any other injuries. He seemed to register the red marks on her arm, the fear in her eyes. He didn't comfort her. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just gave her a single, curt nod. Then he turned, his movements just as deliberate as before, and walked back down the stairs. Elena waited until she heard the car door close and the quiet, powerful rumble of the engine disappearing down the street before she finally managed to get her key in the lock and tumble into her apartment, slamming the deadbolt home. Elena woke to the sharp, insistent sound of her alarm. It was daylight. She felt like she hadn't slept at all, her mind a confusing whirl of champagne flutes, cold eyes, and Sean's panicked face. She dragged herself out of bed to make coffee, and that's when she saw it. A plain white envelope had been slid under her door. Her blood ran cold. She stared at it, her mind immediately going to Sean. But this wasn't his style. His style was yelling and pounding. This was silent. With trembling fingers, she picked it up. It was heavy, made of thick, expensive cardstock. Her name wasn't on it. She tore it open. Inside was a thick stack of $100 bills. She riffled through them, her eyes wide. There had to be thousands of dollars here, enough to cover Nathan's bills for months. Tucked inside the cash was a small, matching card. The handwriting on it was stark, black ink and decisively male. It said, "You don't owe me anything, but don't ignore danger again." She sank onto her small, worn-out sofa, the money clutched in her hand. This was from him, the photographer. He had followed her. He had saved her. And now he had given her this. It wasn't a gift. It felt like a warning, or a payment. She didn't know which was worse. Confused, and more than a little afraid, she shoved the money into an old shoebox in her closet. She couldn't use it, but she couldn't throw it away. She went to her shift at the diner, her mind completely fogged. "You look like you saw a ghost, Elle," her co-worker, Maria, said as she slid a pot of coffee under the warmer. "Tough party last night?" "You could say that," Elena mumbled, tying on her apron. "Hey, wasn't that the party you worked?" Maria said, tapping the screen of her phone, which was propped up on the counter. "The big art gala?" "Yeah, why?" Maria turned the phone around. It was a gossip site. The anonymous patron finally got photographed. God, look at this guy. He's like terrifyingly hot. Elena looked at the screen, and her stomach dropped to the floor. The picture was crisp, professional. It was him, the photographer. He was standing next to a politician, his face set in that same cold, controlled expression. He wasn't holding a camera. The caption beneath read, Reclusive billionaire Luca Moretti, patron of the arts, makes a rare public appearance at his own gala. Moretti, head of the vast Moretti import-export empire, has rarely been seen since taking over the family business 5 years ago. Luca Moretti, Elena whispered, the name feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. Yeah, Maria said, oblivious. My cousin's husband is a cop. He says the Moretti family business is, old school, like Godfather level. They say he's ruthless, owns half the docks and half the politicians in this city. Definitely not someone you want to spill a drink on. Can you imagine? What a life. Elena stared at the picture, the man who had charmed her, the man who had warned her, the man who had appeared in her stairwell like an avenging angel. He wasn't a photographer. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a mob boss, and she hadn't just flirted with him. She had taken his money. Miles away, in a glass-walled penthouse high above the city, Luca Moretti stared at a different set of pictures. They were the ones he had taken. Sharp black and white images of the city, of the art, of the pretense, and 3 of Elena. One was of her laughing, a candid shot where she'd been talking to another waitress. Her whole face lit up, the exhaustion momentarily forgotten. His consigliere, a man in his 60s named Antonio, stood beside him, hands clasped behind his back. It was unnecessary, Luca, Antonio said, his voice quiet but firm. You were seen. You interfered with the girl's domestic issue, and the money. It was an impulse. She was in trouble, Luca said, his voice flat. She's a waitress from Queens. She is, with all due respect, trouble you do not need. We have the Castellano situation heating up. You cannot afford distractions. Luca looked at the photo, at the light in her eyes. He hadn't been able to stop himself. When his security, who had been tailing her as a precaution, reported that the ex-boyfriend was waiting at her apartment, something cold and possessive had snapped inside him. He had driven there himself, breaking a dozen of his own rules. He hadn't felt an impulse like that in a decade. Her honesty, her complete lack of fear when she'd spoken to him, it had cut through the numb, controlled world he lived in. She's a distraction, Antonio pressed. Let it go. Luca stayed silent, his thumb tracing the outline of her face on the digital screen. He couldn't stop thinking about her. His head of security entered the room, clearing his throat. Boss, you asked for the report on the ex-boyfriend, Sean Sullivan? Luca looked up, his expression hardening. And he's small-time, a low-level mule, mostly, moves cash. For who? The man hesitated. He's connected to the Castellanos. Antonio swore softly in Italian. Luca's eyes narrowed. The girl. The ex. The rival family. It was not a coincidence. It was a complication. Watch him, Luca ordered, his voice dropping to that cold, dangerous level. And put a quiet detail on the girl. I want to know everywhere she goes. And I want to know exactly what the Castellanos want with a broke waitress. Elena Carter tried to forget him. She shoved the shoebox of money so far under her bed it hit the wall, a solid, terrifying thud of complication she refused to acknowledge. She went to work at the diner. She visited Nathan at the rehab center, and she pretended her life was exactly as it had been 2 days prior. It was a lie. Every time the bell above the diner door jingled, her head snapped up, her heart leaping into her throat. She expected Sean. She expected him. On the 3rd day, she got her wish. It was the Tuesday lunch rush, a chaotic symphony of clattering plates, sizzling burgers, and Maria calling out orders. Elena was pouring coffee, her arm aching from the weight of the pot. When the bell chimed, she didn't look up until a shadow fell across her counter station. The diner went silent in her head. The clatter, the shouting, the hiss of the grill, it all faded to a distant hum. Luca Moretti was sitting at her counter. He was in another one of those offensively perfect suits, this one a dark charcoal gray that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. He was an apex predator in a room full of pigeons. He didn't belong. He took up all the air. Maria, wiping down the counter nearby, actually stopped, her mouth slightly open. Elena's hand, holding the coffee pot, trembled. Luca looked at her, His cold eyes raked over her, the cheap, pale blue uniform, the stained apron, the pencil stuck behind her ear. He looked at her like she was the only person in the room. "Coffee," he said. His voice was too low for the noisy diner, but it cut through the air straight to her. "Black." Her fingers fumbled as she grabbed a mug. She poured, spilling a small puddle onto the counter. "Damn it," she whispered, her cheeks burning. She grabbed a rag, but his hand was there first, covering hers. His skin was warm, his fingers were long, his hand strong, encompassing hers completely. It wasn't a gentle touch, it was a claiming. "Elena," he said, his voice a quiet command. She looked up, meeting his intense gaze. She was close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "You're shaking," he observed, his expression unreadable. "You startled me." She pulled her hand free from under his, her skin tingling where he'd touched her. She finished wiping the counter. "We don't get many billionaires in here, or, whatever you are." A shadow of a smile touched his lips. "Just a man who wants coffee." He let her go back to work, but he didn't drink the coffee. He just sat there, the full mug steaming in front of him, and he watched her. For an hour. Elena felt his gaze like a physical weight. Every time she moved, every time she scribbled an order or forced a smile for a customer, she felt him. It was a hot, possessive stare that made her skin prickle and her stomach clench. It was a silent, charged conversation. He was telling her, without words, that he hadn't forgotten, that the envelope under her bed was not the end of it. When the lunch rush finally died, he placed a $50 bill on the counter for a $2 coffee and stood. He paused, looked at her one last time, a look that promised later, and then he was gone. Maria rushed over. "Oh my God, Elena, do you know who that was? That was Luca Moretti. What is he doing here?" "He wanted coffee," Elena said, her voice hollow as she pocketed the 50. It felt as heavy as the cash in the shoebox. Her shift ended at 10 o'clock. The night was cold, the street outside the diner empty and slick with a light rain. She clutched her thin jacket, her stomach in knots. She hadn't heard from Sean since the incident on the stairs, but the silence was almost worse than his harassment. She took a deep breath and pushed open the diner's back door. Stepping into the dim alley she used as a shortcut to the bus stop. The black sedan was parked at the mouth of the alley, its engine a low, powerful rumble that was barely audible. Luca was leaning against the passenger side, his arms crossed. The rain didn't seem to touch him. Elena stopped, her heart hammering. "You need to stop this." "Stop what?" "Following me, showing up at my work, watching me." "I'm not watching you," he said, his voice smooth. "I'm making sure you're safe." He uncrossed his arms and opened the passenger door. "Get in. I'll give you a ride." "No, thank you. I can take the bus." "The bus that comes in 15 minutes? The one that drops you 3 blocks from your apartment in the dark," he countered. He wasn't asking. He was stating facts. He knew her routine. The realization sent a chill through her. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice smaller than she wanted. "Get in the car, Elena. It's cold." She hesitated, warring with herself. He was a mob boss. He was dangerous. The money under her bed was dirty, but she was also so tired, and the memory of Sean's grip on her wrist was still fresh. The memory of Luca's silent, terrifying defense of her was fresher. She walked to the car and slid into the leather seat. He closed the door, the sound a solid, expensive thud. He walked around and got into the driver's side. The car was warm. It smelled of rich leather and him, that sandalwood and rain scent. The silence inside was absolute, a stark contrast to the city outside. He pulled away from the curb, his driving as smooth and controlled as everything else about him. They drove for several minutes in silence. Elena stared out the window at the blurry, rain-streaked lights. "Why were you at the gala?" he asked, his voice breaking the quiet. She turned to look at him. His handsome profile was illuminated by the dashboard lights. "I was working. I cater. You saw me." "Why 2 jobs? The diner, the catering?" Elena bristled. "I have bills." "What kind of bills?" The question was too personal, too invasive, but his tone wasn't mocking. It was curious, demanding. She found herself, inexplicably, wanting to tell him, wanting someone to finally understand the weight she was carrying. "My brother," she said, her voice dropping. "Nathan, he was in an accident, construction job, faulty scaffolding. He fell 3 stories. He's lucky to be alive." Luca said nothing, his eyes on the road, but she felt his attention sharpen. "His insurance ran out months ago," she continued, the words tumbling out of her now. "But he needs physical therapy, twice a day. If he stops, the doctors say he'll never walk again, so I pay for it. I pay for all of it. The diner, the catering, any extra shift I can get, it's never enough." She stopped, breathing hard, embarrassed by the confession. "And your ex-boyfriend," Luca said. It wasn't a question. Sean is a problem. He doesn't like that I left him. He doesn't like that I'm working all the time. He thinks I'm..." "What?" "He thinks I'm invisible," she whispered, the admission tasting like ash. "And he's right. At the gala, I'm a uniform. At the diner, I'm just the girl who brings the coffee. To Sean, I'm something he thinks he owns. No one actually sees me." "I see you," Luca said, his voice quiet but absolute. The simple statement hung in the air, heavy and profound. She stared at him, at the set of his jaw, the confidence in his hands on the steering wheel. He saw her. At the gala. He'd seen past the uniform, at the diner. He'd seen her and no one else. He pulled up in front of her building. He killed the engine. And the silence flooded back in. Heavier this time. She should get out. Say thank you. Run. Neither of them moved. He turned in his seat. The space in the car felt impossibly small. He was so close. She could feel the heat radiating from him. "Elena," he said, his voice a low rumble. He lifted one hand, his movement slow, deliberate. He brushed a stray strand of damp hair back from her temple. His fingers were slightly rough, scorching a trail on her skin. She shivered, but not from the cold. Her breath caught in her throat. His gaze dropped to her mouth. She watched his eyes, dark and focused. He was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. She leaned in, just a fraction, her lips parting. The air between them was electric, burning with a tension so thick it was hard to breathe. He traced the line of her cheekbone with his thumb, his gaze unwavering. He was memorizing her. Then, his expression tightened. A muscle in his jaw jumped. He was fighting himself. He pulled his hand back, his fingers curling into a fist in his lap. He looked away, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "Go inside," he said, his voice suddenly hard, cold. "Lock your door." The rejection was like a physical slap. Elena fumbled for the door handle, her face flaming. She got out of the car and slammed the door, not looking back as she ran up the steps to her building. She didn't see him drive away. That night, Elena dreamed of him. It was not a soft, romantic dream. It was a dream of sensations, the scrape of his fingers on her cheek, the low, gravelly rumble of his voice saying her name, the scent of sandalwood and rain, the image of his mouth, so close to hers, denied. She dreamed of his hands, large and capable, and the feeling of being watched, not by a man, but by something powerful and possessive. She woke in the dark, her heart pounding, her body aching with a confusing, breathless tension. She didn't hear from Luca for the rest of the week, but the threats from Sean escalated. It started small. A figure she saw standing across the street from the diner, watching her, who melted into the crowd when she looked too long. Then, her locker at the diner was vandalized, the word whore scratched into the paint. She received a call at her apartment, no one speaking, just the sound of breathing on the other end. She knew it was Sean. He was losing control. She didn't tell Luca. How could she? He wasn't her friend. He wasn't her anything. He was a dangerous man who had given her a ride home and almost kissed her. She went to the police precinct and filed for a restraining order, but the paper felt flimsy in her hands. A useless defense against a man who didn't follow rules. Meanwhile, in his penthouse, Luca got the report he was waiting for. "Sullivan is definitely laundering for the Castellanos," his security head said, placing a file on the desk. "He's been using his connection to the girl as a cover, moving small amounts of cash through her diner's neighborhood, but he's sloppy. The Castellanos know it. They think he's been skimming. And the girl? Luca asked, his voice cold. They think she's a loose end, or worse, that she's connected to you now. They saw you at the diner. They saw you pick her up. Luca's blood ran cold. He had tried to protect her, but he had only painted a bigger target on her back. Where is she? Working. Her shift ends in 10 minutes. Luca was moving before the man finished his sentence. Elena was taking out the last bag of garbage. Maria had left early, and the alley behind the diner was dark, the air thick with the smell of wet pavement and rotting food. She hated this part of the night. She tossed the bag into the dumpster and turned to hurry back inside. 2 men stepped out from the shadows, blocking her path. These were not men from the neighborhood, and neither of them was Sean. They were big, dressed in dark clothes, and they looked at her with dead, empty eyes. "Elena Carter?" one of them asked, his voice flat. Her heart stopped. "Who are you?" "Doesn't matter. We just have a message for you, from a friend of Sean's. He says you need to learn to keep your mouth shut and to stay away from men who are out of your league." She tried to bolt, to get back to the diner door, but the second man grabbed her arm, his fingers digging in like claws. She screamed and slammed her other hand, the one holding her keys, against the side of his head. He grunted and shoved her, hard. She fell backward, her arm scraping violently against the rough brick wall. The skin tore, and a sharp, hot pain shot up to her shoulder. "Stupid bitch," the first man snarled, lunging for her. Headlights flooded the alley, bright as the sun, turning the rain into glittering, frozen streaks. A car engine roared, and the black sedan fishtailed to a stop, blocking the alley exit. The car door flew open. Luca Moretti got out. This was not the calm, controlled man from her stairwell. This was not the intense, brooding man from the diner. This was a different creature entirely. His face was a mask of pure, murderous rage. The 2 men, momentarily blinded, let go of Elena and turned. They were big. Luca was bigger, and he moved faster than any man his size should. The fight was over before Elena could even draw a full breath. It was not a fight. It was a brutal, efficient dismantling. There was the sickening, wet crack of a fist connecting with a nose, a grunt as Luca drove an elbow into the other man's ribs, and a final, heavy thud as the second man was slammed against the dumpster and slid to the ground, unconscious. The first man was already on his knees, clutching his broken face. Luca didn't even look at them again. He stalked toward Elena, who was still on the ground, shaking, clutching her bleeding arm. His fury was a palpable thing, a heat rolling off him in waves, but when he reached her, his expression changed. The rage vanished, replaced by a fierce, protective urgency. He knelt in front of her. "Are you hurt?" "My arm," she whispered, her voice trembling. He looked. His gaze darkened at the sight of the blood welling from the long, jagged scrape. Without another word, he slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her against his chest as if she weighed nothing. Elena cried out, a small, shocked sound, and buried her face in his shirt. He smelled like the rain and his cologne and something else, something sharp and dangerous, like ozone. He carried her to the car, kicking the first aid kit out of his back seat onto the pavement. "Get in!" he snarled at the one conscious man, who was still trying to get his breath. "You're driving your friend to the hospital, and you're going to tell Marco Castellano that if he ever comes near her again, I will burn his entire family to the ground. Do you understand me?" The man, bleeding and terrified, nodded frantically. Luca placed Elena gently in the passenger seat and stalked around to the driver's side. He got in, slammed the door, and sped out of the alley, leaving the 2 men behind in the rain. They drove in silence, but this time it was not a tense, quiet silence. It was the heavy, thrumming aftermath of violence. Elena was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. He drove, one hand on the wheel, the other clenching and unclenching on his thigh. He didn't take her home. He took her to the penthouse. He parked in a private underground garage, led her to a private elevator, and didn't let go of her until they were inside the massive glass-walled apartment. The city glittered below them, a cold, indifferent jewel. "Sit," he commanded, pointing to a plush sofa. He disappeared into another room and returned with a first aid kit. He knelt in front of her, just as he had in the alley. He opened the kit and took out antiseptic wipes and bandages. "This will sting," he said, his voice clipped, still tight with anger. He took her arm. His touch, for a man who had just moved with such brutality, was incredibly gentle. He carefully dabbed at the long, ugly scrape, cleaning away the grit and blood. Elena winced, tears of shock and pain welling in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice low and rough, his eyes fixed on his task. "Tell you what?" she whispered, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. "That he was threatening you, that you were being followed. I filed a restraining order." He let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "A piece of paper. You thought that would stop them?" He looked up, his dark eyes boring into hers. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. A raw, aching vulnerability that matched her own. "I didn't know who to tell," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm alone." "No, you're not," he said, his voice fierce. He finished cleaning the wound, his movements precise. The heat from his body, his proximity, was overwhelming. The shock was fading, replaced by a different kind of adrenaline. He was so close. He was alive. He had saved her. The heat in the room was simmering. She could feel it. He was still holding her arm, his thumb tracing the edge of the bandage. She didn't think. She just acted. Elena leaned forward and kissed him. It was a clumsy, desperate, tear-soaked kiss. It was all the fear, all the gratitude, all the pent-up tension of the last week crashing into him. Luca froze. His entire body went rigid. His hand on her arm tightened, his fingers digging in. He was resisting. He was a wall of muscle and control. He tried to pull back, his other hand coming up to grip her shoulder, to push her away. "Don't," she whispered against his mouth, kissing him again, her fingers tangling in the front of his shirt. "Please." A sound tore from his throat, a low groan of surrender, and then he gave in. His control shattered. He kissed her back, and it was nothing like her gentle, desperate attempt. It was a claiming. His mouth was hard, hungry, taking everything she was offering and demanding more. His hand left her shoulder and buried itself in her hair, tilting her head to deepen the kiss. The other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her off the sofa and against his kneeling body, crushing her to his chest. It was a drowning. It was a rescue. He broke the kiss, only to trail his mouth down her jaw, to the pulse hammering in her throat. "Elena!" he breathed, his voice thick, unrecognizable. He was the most dangerous man she had ever met, and she had never, ever felt safer. He lifted her again, as he had in the alley, but this time it was different. This time it was slow, possessive. He stood, his mouth never leaving hers, and carried her from the living room into the darkness of his bedroom. He laid her on the massive bed, the sheets cool against her skin. He followed her down, his body a heavy, warm weight that anchored her. The night was slow burning, emotional. His hands were firm, sure, mapping the lines of her body, his touch both a question and a command. Her voice trembled, whispering his name in the dark. He kissed the tears from her cheeks, his lips gentle, before they turned hungry again. It was not the desperate, fumbling encounters she had known. This was a slow, deliberate discovery. His hands, his mouth, his body, they learned her like a secret, unwrapping her layers of fear and exhaustion, finding the woman he had seen from the very beginning. And she, in turn, learned the heat he kept banked beneath the ice, the surprising tenderness in his strong hands, the silent, desperate way he held on to her, as if she were the only thing keeping him human. Elena woke to the unfamiliar sensation of quiet. In her own apartment, morning was an assault of sirens, garbage trucks, and the paper-thin walls that broadcasted her neighbors' arguments, here, in Luca's penthouse. The only sound was the distant, muffled sigh of the city far below. The rising sun painted the vast, minimalist bedroom in shades of pale gold and gray. She was alone in the massive bed, the sheets an impossibly soft, high-thread count cotton that smelled faintly of him, that clean, intoxicating scent of sandalwood and rain. Her body ached, a deep, pleasant soreness that was a stark reminder of the night before. Her arm, where the brick had scraped it, was covered by a neat, professional bandage. She sat up, pulling the sheet with her, and saw her own cheap clothes from the diner folded neatly on a chair. Beside them, someone had laid out a simple, plush black robe. She hesitated, then slid out of bed and into its warm, heavy embrace. She found him in the kitchen. It was a vast expanse of stainless steel and dark marble, more like a restaurant than a home, and he was standing at the stove, his back to her. He was in a pair of dark gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt, his hair damp, clearly fresh from a shower. He wasn't on the phone. He wasn't flanked by men in suits. He was making breakfast. She watched him for a long moment, stunned. He cracked an egg one-handed into a sizzling pan with an economical, practiced motion. The man who had dismantled 2 attackers with brutal, terrifying efficiency was cooking. He must have heard her, because he spoke without turning. "There's coffee on the counter. How do you like your eggs?" "What?" she managed, her voice thick with sleep. He turned. His face was clear. The coldness from the gala and the fury from the alley replaced by a quiet, neutral focus. But his eyes were different. They were fixed on her, assessing, softer than she'd ever seen them. "Eggs," he repeated, gesturing with the spatula. "Or there's fruit, whatever you want. Scrambled is fine," she stammered, pulling the robe tighter. She felt exposed, out of place. She walked to the counter and poured a mug of coffee. It was dark and strong. He finished the eggs, slid them onto a plate with a piece of toast, and set it in front of her at the marble island. He poured his own coffee and leaned against the opposite counter, watching her. The quiet, domestic scene was so jarring, so utterly at odds with the man who had terrified Sean in her hallway, that she couldn't process it. He wasn't eating. He was just watching her, waiting. "You're very gentle," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Last night," she said, looking at the bandage on her arm. "You were so careful. And this. Breakfast." She gestured with her fork. "It's not what I expected." "What did you expect? Elena?" She put the fork down. The food was delicious, but her appetite was gone, replaced by a cold, hard knot of necessity. She had to know. "I expected the man Maria told me about at the diner," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "The one whose family is old school. The one who owns half the city. The reclusive billionaire with the dangerous reputation." Luca's expression did not change, but a stillness settled over him. The air grew cold again. "Who are you? Luca? Really?" She met his gaze, her own unflinching. She had survived last night. She had kissed this man. She deserved more than a cryptic warning on a rooftop. "You're not a photographer. You're not just some billionaire art patron. Those men last night, they knew you. They were terrified of you." He set his coffee mug down with a heavy, final click on the marble. He looked at her for a long, heavy minute, a silence so profound she could hear her own heart beating. "I am exactly what you think I am, War," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I am the man who inherited a world my father built on blood and violence. I am the head of a family that does not follow the rules you live by. The men who attacked you, they work for my enemy." The confession hung in the air, stark and ugly. "So you're a mob boss," she whispered, the word tasting like poison. "It's a title," he said, dismissing it. "What I am is a man with responsibilities I did not choose, but which I will not abandon. I'm not a good man, Elena." He walked around the island until he was standing in front of her, so close she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He was a wall of muscle and shadow, blocking out the morning light. "You should be afraid of me," he said, his voice a low, rough rumble. You should have run the moment you found out my name. I wanted to, she admitted, her voice trembling. I was terrified. I still am. But you're still here. He lifted a hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch scorching. Why? Because you're also the man who saved me, she whispered, her eyes searching his. Twice. You're the man who made me feel safe for the first time in ever. You're the one who sees me. He closed his eyes. A flicker of some deep, internal pain crossing his features. That, he said, is the part that is dangerous, for both of us. He opened his eyes, the cold control back, but now it was tempered by a fierce, protective glint. I'm not a good man, he repeated, his thumb stroking her skin. But I will not let anything happen to you. Do you understand? Nothing. Elena looked into his dark, complicated eyes and knew, with a sinking, terrifying certainty, that she was already in too deep. Her old life, with its tips and its buses and its fear of Sean, was over. This man, this violent, gentle, broken man, was her new reality. She was afraid of his world, but she was no longer afraid of him. And she couldn't walk away. She didn't want to. Life changed instantly. Luca did not ask her to move in. He told her. She was not to return to her apartment, and she was not to go back to the diner. You can't just fire me from my life, she argued, following him through the vast living room as he spoke quietly on the phone, giving orders in rapid Italian. He hung up and turned to her. Your life, as it was, is over. They know where you work. They know where you live. Going back is a death sentence, for you and for anyone near you. But my brother, I have to see Nathan. I have to pay his bills. It's being handled, he said, his tone final. What does that mean? Handled? You can't just buy... Yes, I can, he interrupted, his voice sharp. I can, and I did. You will have a car, a driver. His name is Ben. He will not leave your side. He will take you to the hospital, and he will bring you back. This is not a negotiation. Elena, this is how you stay alive. She felt a flash of her old, defiant anger, but it was useless against the cold, hard logic of his world. He was right. The next day, a silent man named Ben, who looked like he could punch through a brick wall, drove her to the rehab center in a black town car. Elena walked in, her purse full of the cash she was supposed to pay for the week. She went to the billing office. The administrator, a kind woman named Mrs. Davies, looked up and smiled. Elena, hello. I was just about to call you. Hi, I'm sorry, I'm a day late with this week's payment. Elena began, pulling out the envelope. Oh, no, dear. Mrs. Davies said, looking at her computer screen with a slightly bewildered expression. That's why I was calling. There's no need. Your brother's account. Well, it's been paid in full. Elena froze. What? Yes, all of it. The outstanding balance and his projected care for the next 6 months. It's all zeroed out. A wire transfer came in this morning, anonymous, of course, a charitable donation earmarked for Nathan Carter. Elena sank into the chair opposite the desk. 6 months, the entire crushing weight of it, gone. She didn't need to ask who. She felt a dizzying, conflicting wave of immense gratitude and a terrible, profound sense of being trapped. She was being bought. She was being protected, cared for, and owned, all at once. She went to Nathan's room. He was working with a therapist, his face tight with concentration as he tried to move his leg one agonizing inch. He looked up when she entered and broke into a wide, tired grin. Hey, Elle, you look different, new clothes. She looked down at the simple and expensive jeans and silk blouse Luca's people had provided. Something like that, she said, forcing a smile, her heart aching. Weeks later, Luca brought her to his gallery opening. It was the first time she had been to a public event with him. He was no longer just the reclusive billionaire. He was her. She didn't know what he was, but she was on his arm. He had bought her a dress, a deep emerald green that clung to her body and left her shoulders bare. She felt beautiful and completely fraudulent. The gallery was packed, This was Luca's other world, the art patrons, the city's elite, the critics, and, she soon realized, his other world too. She saw men who looked at Luca with a deference that bordered on fear. She met Antonio, his consigliere, the older, impeccably dressed man she'd seen him with in photos. Miss Carter, Antonio said, his smile polite, but his eyes were like chips of ice. A pleasure. Luca has told us so much about you. He hadn't. That was the point. Antonio looked at her as if she were a landmine. She was the complication, the weakness, the waitress who had dragged his boss into a street fight. The tension was so thick she could barely breathe. She tried to get away, murmuring an excuse to Luca and slipping into the crowd to look at the photographs. They were stunning, stark, black and white images of the city. Lonely, beautiful, and full of a quiet, cold despair. They were him. He has a real eye for despair, doesn't he? She turned. A man was standing beside her, a champagne flute in his hand. He was young, probably not much older than her, with a movie star smile, artfully messy dark hair, and a suit that looked like it cost more than her car. They're honest, Elena replied, drawn to his easy, charming energy. Honest, he repeated, laughing. I love that. No one in this room is honest. He's Marco Castellano, he said, offering a hand. Art investor, and you are the mystery guest. Elena Carter, she said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, warm. Elena, beautiful. He leaned in, his gaze appreciative. You're a refreshing change from this crowd. Elena, you're not polished. You're real. Is that a compliment? She asked, a small smile playing on her lips. It's the highest one I can give. He was flirting, openly and shamelessly. It was so normal. A normal, handsome, cocky man flirting at a party. It was a breath of the life she used to know. So, how does a real person like you end up with a man like Luca Moretti? Before she could answer, a hand clamped down on her arm, hard. Luca was there. His body was rigid, his face a mask of stone. The friendly, charming atmosphere vanished, sucked into the black hole of his silent fury. We're leaving, he said, his voice a low growl. Luca, hey, Marco said, his smile not faltering, but his eyes hardening. I was just introducing myself to your lovely... Luca ignored him completely. He pulled Elena, hard, away from Marco. He dragged her through the crowd, past a startled Antonio, and into a private hallway leading to the offices. The moment they were out of sight, he slammed her back against the wall. He didn't hurt her, but the force of his body pinning her, caging her in, stole her breath. He was trembling. Not just his hands, which were planted on the wall on either side of her head, but his entire body. He was shaking with a rage so profound it terrified her. Luca, what is wrong with you? She gasped. What did he say to you? He demanded, his voice low, guttural. Who? Marco. He was being nice. He introduced himself. Stay away from him. Luca snarled, leaning in, his forehead pressing against hers. She could feel the heat rolling off him. Do you understand me, Elena? You don't look at him. You don't talk to him. You don't breathe in his direction. I don't understand. You're scaring me. He's not who you think he is. He breathed, his eyes wild. He looked at her mouth, at the fear and confusion in her eyes. The anger warred with something else, something raw and desperate. He's the man who sent his dogs to attack you in the alley, Luca whispered. That is Marco Castellano, the heir. Elena's blood ran cold. He knew who I was? No, not yet. He just saw something he wanted, and he knows you're with me. Luca's gaze dropped to her lips. The trembling in his body intensified. He was losing a fight with himself. And you are, he growled, as if the words were being torn from him. You're mine. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of tenderness. It was not the slow, emotional discovery of their first night. It was a brand. It was a hungry, angry, desperate claiming. His mouth was hard, bruising, taking, his teeth scraping her bottom lip. He was marking his territory. He was kissing her as if he could erase Marco's smile, his words, his very existence, from her memory. He was expressing, in the only way he knew how, his absolute paralyzing fear of losing her. And she kissed him back, just as fiercely, her fingers digging into his shoulders, her fear turning into a reckless, wild response. Back at the penthouse, the storm broke. They didn't speak. The moment the elevator doors opened, he had her against the wall again, his mouth on hers, his hands tearing at the zipper of the green dress. She ripped at his shirt, buttons scattering on the marble floor, the adrenaline from the gallery, the confrontation, the raw, possessive fear. It all exploded. They barely made it to the bedroom. This was rougher than the first time. It was more desperate. It was a collision. It was a fight to prove she was his, and his alone. His hands were firm, his grip possessive, his movements hard and driving. It was on the edge of violence, but it was a shared desperation. It was a frantic, hungry confirmation that they were both still there, both still alive, anchors in a world that was trying to tear them apart. Afterward, they lay in the dark, tangled in the damp sheets, their chests heaving. The silence that settled was not peaceful. It was heavy, charged with the truth that had been hiding in the shadows. Luca finally broke it, his voice a rough, exhausted sound in the darkness. That man, Marco Castellano, his family and my family. We are at war. It's been a war for generations, but it's heating up. He's reckless, he's ambitious, and he just saw you. He rolled onto his back, staring at the ceiling. I brought you into this. Elena, when I put a target on your back, by being with me, by being seen with me, my enemies will come for you. They will see you as a way to hurt me. Elena lay still, absorbing the cold. Hard fact. This was it. The full truth. She was a weakness. She sat up, the sheet pooling around her waist. She looked at his profile in the moonlight streaming through the window, the hard jaw, the straight nose, the mouth that she now knew could be both cruel and tender. "So what's your plan?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Hide me? Lock me up in this glass tower and hope they don't find me? Is that it? Am I your prisoner?" He turned his head, his eyes dark, unreadable. "My plan is to keep you alive." She shook her head, a fierce, sudden anger rising in her. "No, no, no." She moved, straddling his hips, forcing him to look at her. She grabbed his face between her hands, her grip tight. "I am done being invisible. I am done being a victim. I am not Sean's punching bag. I am not your men's problem, and I am not your weakness. Luca, do you hear me?" He stared at her, stunned into silence by the fire in her eyes, the strength in her hands. "I won't be the fragile thing you have to protect," she said, her voice dropping, becoming thick with a resolve she didn't know she possessed. "I won't be the reason you lose." She leaned down, her lips brushing his. "But I'll be your reason to end this war." Elena's vow. "I'll be your reason to end this war," still hung in the air of the penthouse, a brave, reckless challenge. But the war, it turned out, did not care about her reasons. She'd been living in the penthouse for 2 weeks. It was a beautiful prison, a cage of glass and marble high above the city. Luca had forbidden her from returning to her apartment, and he had permanently, firmly, taken her off the diner's schedule. "You can't just bench me," she had argued. "I am not benching you, Elena. I am keeping you alive," he had countered, his voice final, but she was suffocating. She missed the clatter of plates, the smell of burnt coffee, even the complaints of her regulars. She missed being someone. One afternoon, when Luca was across town in a meeting, she convinced her guard, Ben, to take her to the diner. "Just for 10 minutes, she pleaded. "I left my spare keys in my locker and I need to see Maria." Ben, a stoic man who had not smiled in the 2 weeks she'd known him, finally relented, his jaw tight. 10 minutes, I do not leave your side." The diner was quiet, nearing the mid-afternoon lull. Maria was wiping down the counter, her back to the door. "Maria!" Elena called out, a rush of relief making her feel lightheaded. Maria spun around, her face breaking into a wide grin. "Elle, oh my God, where have you been? We all thought you won the lottery and ran off with that guy." Her eyes flicked to Ben, who stood at the door, his gaze scanning the street. "Who's the bodyguard?" "He's "A friend." Elena lied, moving behind the counter. It felt like coming home. "I just needed to grab my—" The bell above the door jingled, not with the light chime of a customer, but with the violence of the door being thrown open. 3 men filled the doorway. They were not here for coffee. They carried wooden baseball bats. "Maria, get in the kitchen." "Lock the door," Ben ordered, his voice a low, urgent command. He stepped forward, shielding Elena with his body. Maria screamed and scrambled for the swinging kitchen door. The men fanned out. The leader, a man with a jagged scar across his chin, smiled. It was a terrible, empty gesture. "Elena Carter, we're supposed to deliver a message," he said, his voice casual. He hefted the bat. "A gift from Marco. He's very disappointed you're hanging around with the wrong people." "You need to leave," Ben said. His hands raised slightly, his body coiled. The man just laughed. "And a message for Moretti." He turned and, with a grunt, swung the bat into the glass pastry display. It exploded in a shower of glass and shattered muffins. Elena screamed. The other 2 men went to work. They were not trying to rob the place. They were executing it. They swung their bats with methodical, brutal efficiency. The stools were smashed from their bolts. The counter cracked. The coffee machines were swept to the floor. Ben moved. He intercepted the man nearest to Elena, driving a fist into his throat. The man collapsed, gagging. But the other 2 turned on him. Ben was good, but he was outnumbered. One of them swung the bat, catching him hard in the ribs. Ben grunted in pain but didn't go down. "Get out! Elena, go!" he yelled, grappling with one of them. The leader, the one with the scar, saw her. He advanced on her, his smile widening. "The message is for you." Elena backed away, her hands fumbling behind her, her fingers closed around a heavy, industrial coffee pot. She lifted it and threw it with all her strength. It struck him in the chest, showering him with hot, black liquid. He roared in surprise and anger. In that second, Ben, having dispatched one of his attackers, slammed the 3rd man's head into the countertop. The man with the scar looked at Ben, then at Elena, then at the sound of distant sirens. "This is just the start," he spat, and then they were gone, running out the door and piling into a dark sedan. Elena was shaking, her knees buckling. The diner was destroyed. It was a wasteland of shattered glass, broken furniture, and the smell of stale coffee. Ben, breathing heavily, leaned against the ruined counter, his hand pressed to his side. Maria was sobbing, peering out from the kitchen. Elena looked at the destruction, at Maria's terror, at Ben's pain. This was because of her. Her old life was not just gone. She had set it on fire. When they returned to the penthouse, Luca was waiting. He was standing in the center of the living room, his back to the door, staring at the skyline. He had already heard. He turned, slowly. His face was devoid of all expression. It was a terrifying, perfect mask of cold control. He didn't look at Ben, who was quietly explaining to another guard what had happened. He looked only at Elena. He walked toward her, his movements measured. He stopped in front of her, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for injury. She was pale, splattered with coffee, but physically unharmed. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. "No, but Ben, Maria, the diner, Luca, I know," he said. He reached out and tucked a trembling strand of hair behind her ear. His hand was steady. "This is what they do. This is the war you wanted me to end." He turned away from her and walked to his desk. He picked up the phone. Elena watched, her heart a cold stone in her chest, as he dialed a number. He began speaking, his voice still low, still perfectly calm, in a rapid, fluid Italian she could not understand. She didn't need to. She recognized the words for fire and Red Hook. She recognized the tone of an executioner signing a death warrant. He hung up. The silence in the room was absolute. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I retaliated," he said, his voice flat. "They burn what is yours. I burn what is theirs. It is the only language they understand, an eye for an eye, a building for a building." That night, the 11 o'clock news led with a story about a string of suspicious, fast-moving fires that had consumed 3 separate warehouses on the Red Hook docks. The properties were all linked to a Castellano-owned import-export company. The war was no longer simmering. It was blazing. Elena did not leave the penthouse after that. The glass tower was her fortress. The days blurred. Luca was gone more often, immersed in the escalating conflict. When he was home, he was distant, his mind clearly on the war. But in the long, quiet nights, the mask would crack. She found him one night, not in their bed, but in his study. He was sitting in the dark, a glass of whiskey in his hand, staring at a framed photograph on his desk. She flipped on a low lamp. It was not one of his stark, artistic photos. It was an old, faded picture of 2 boys. One, a teenager, stared at the camera with a defiant scowl. The other, a younger boy with Luca's dark eyes, looked terrified. "Who is that?" she asked, her voice soft. Luca tensed, as if she'd caught him in a moment of profound weakness. He didn't answer. Elena sat on the edge of his desk. "I'm not leaving. Luca, I live here. My old life is gone. You are my life now. You can't shut me out." He stared into his glass, swirling the amber liquid. "My brother," he said, his voice thick. "My older brother, Nico. Where is he?" "Dead, 20 years ago." He took a long, slow drink. "My father. He was a hard man, a brutal man. This world, this life, was everything to him. Nico was the heir, but he was soft. He liked music. He was kind. My father saw that as a weakness." "What happened?" Elena whispered, dreading the answer. "When Nico was 17, he refused an order. He refused to, punish someone who had disrespected my father. He said it was wrong. My father decided to make an example of him." Luca's voice was hollow, a dead monotone. "He held a meeting, all his capos. He brought Nico to the front of the room. He brought me, too. I was 15. He made me watch." Elena felt sick. She put her hand over her mouth. He did it himself." Luca continued, his eyes vacant, staring at the wall. "He told the room, 'There is no room for weakness in this family.' And then he looked at me. He said, 'You will not be weak, will you, Luca? I was the new heir. I inherited the throne in my brother's blood.'" He finally looked at her, his eyes bottomless pits of old, cold pain. "My father didn't raise a son, Elena. He forged a weapon. He spent the next 10 years burning every soft thing out of me. So no, I am not a good man. There is no good man left to be." Tears streamed down Elena's face. She didn't wipe them away. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw. He was trembling, a fine, violent shudder. "You're wrong," she whispered. "He missed a piece." She thought of the money, the anonymous wire transfer that had saved her brother. She had never thanked him for it. She hadn't known how. Now, she understood. It wasn't a transaction. It was an act of rebellion. It was the last piece of Nico, the last piece of the boy in the photograph, that his father had failed to destroy. This new, painful understanding fueled a desperate, reckless hope in her. Days later, they stood in the living room. It was late. A violent thunderstorm was raging outside, the rain lashing against the glass walls. The war was going badly. Luca was tense, stretched to his breaking point. "You can stop this," she said, her voice quiet but firm. He turned from the window. "We are not having this conversation again." "Yes, we are." "You paid for my brother's medical care," she stated. He frowned. "That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with it. That wasn't a mob boss. That wasn't a weapon. That was a good man. The man who made me breakfast. The man who holds me in the dark when he thinks I'm asleep. He's still in there. Luca." "Stop!" he roared, his control finally snapping. "You don't know what you're talking about. That man is gone. He died when I was 15. "He's not," she cried, advancing on him. "He's right here, and you're letting him die, over and over, because you're too afraid to fight for him. You can end this. We can leave. We can disappear." "Walk away?" he laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "This isn't a job, Elena. You don't give 2 weeks' notice. This is blood. You think Castellano will just let me retire? The only way out of this life is in a coffin. So you'll just keep being this monster, she sobbed. I am what I am, he bellowed, his face contorted in anguish. I am too far gone to change, and I am doing what I have to do to keep you safe. I don't want to be safe. She screamed, tears blinding her. I want you. She turned, overwhelmed, and fled, yanking open the heavy glass door to the balcony. She stumbled out into the storm. The wind and rain hit her like a physical blow, plastering her thin clothes to her skin in an instant. Elena! He roared, following her. The rain soaked him in seconds. Get back inside, it's not safe. No, she yelled over the wind, turning to face him. She was drenched, her hair streaming, her body shaking from the cold and the sobs. I am done hiding. I am done being your prisoner. I love you. Do you hear me? I love the man you're trying to kill. He froze. The rain sluiced down his face, masking the tears that sprang to his eyes. He stared at her. This beautiful, defiant, broken woman who was standing in a thunderstorm, screaming that she loved him. All the armor, all the ice, all the control he had forged over 20 years. It shattered. He crossed the balcony in one stride and crashed his mouth against hers. It was not a kiss. It was a drowning. It was all the rain, all the pain, all the years of frozen grief melting in a desperate, burning flood. His hands tangled in her wet hair, his mouth hungry, desperate. She clung to him, her fingers digging into his soaked shirt, kissing him back with all the force of her conviction. It was a tearful, passionate reunion, a battle and a surrender all at once. You are not too far gone, she whispered against his lips, her body trembling. I won't let you be. He broke the kiss, his forehead resting against hers. His body was shaking. I love you, he breathed, the words torn from his very soul, a confession he had never made. God help me. Elena, I love you. He lifted her into his arms, her wet legs wrapping around his waist. He carried her inside, their mouths never separating, their bodies soaked, their need for each other a primal, desperate thing. He kicked the bedroom door open, shedding his wet jacket, his hands on her hands on him, a frantic, loving confirmation that they were both, finally, alive. A fragile peace settled over the penthouse. Luca had made a decision. He was looking for a way out. The war had an unexpected casualty. Antonio arrived one morning, his face grim. Sean Sullivan, he announced. He was arrested. Elena looked up from her coffee. What? Sean? The name felt like a relic from another life. He was laundering money for the Castellanos. Antonio explained. He got sloppy and greedy. He was skimming. Marco was going to kill him. We precipitated the situation. An anonymous tip to the NYPD, detailing his entire operation. His betrayal of both you and the Castellanos is now public. He's facing at least 10 years. He is off the board. Elena just nodded, a quiet, cold relief washing over her. Another ghost, gone. Weeks passed. Luca was working on an exit strategy. It was complicated, dangerous. We need to be ghosts, he said. Then, an invitation arrived, the annual Children's Hospital Fund Gala. It was the one night of the year that was considered neutral ground, a sacred truce. We have to go, Luca said. We have to be seen, to show strength, to show that nothing has changed. It's the only way they won't suspect we're planning to run. Is it safe? Elena asked. It's the safest place in the city. He promised. I will not let you out of my sight. She wore a red dress, the color of defiance and hope. Luca, devastating in a black tuxedo, kept his hand on the small of her back the entire night. The air was thick with tension. Every criminal, every politician, every cop in the city was there. Elena, feeling claustrophobic, saw Luca get cornered by Antonio and a city councilman. I need some air, she whispered, touching his arm. He nodded, his eyes reluctant. The terrace. Don't go any further. I'll be right there. She slipped through the crowd, pushing open the glass doors to a large, quiet terrace. The cool night air was a relief. She leaned against the balustrade, looking at the skyline. We meet again, Elena. Her blood ran cold. She turned. Marco Castellano stepped out from the shadows of an alcove. His charming smile was gone. His eyes were flat, dead. "You look beautiful," he said, taking a step toward her. "Luca has good taste." "Let go of me," she said, her voice low, as he took her arm in a painful grip. "I don't think so." Two of his men materialized from the darkness. "You know, I thought you were special. I really did. I thought maybe you were the one who could tame him." "Get your hands off me," she hissed, trying to pull away. He laughed. A short, ugly sound. He pulled a white cloth from his pocket. "He burned my warehouses. He had my associate arrested. He thinks he can just leave. But you don't get to leave." He pressed the cloth hard over her mouth and nose. The smell was sweet, chemical, overpowering. "You know," he whispered in her ear, his voice the last thing she heard as her vision blurred and the city lights dissolved into pinpricks. "You're not his strength. You were just a weakness to exploit, and he took the bait." Her world went black. Luca turned. She was gone. A cold, primal panic seized his chest. "Elena!" He pushed past the councilman, his eyes scanning the room. Not at the bar. Not by the door. "Elena!" Antonio saw the look on his face and was already moving. Speaking into his sleeve, Luca ran to the terrace. It was empty, save for a single red earring glinting on the stone. His phone vibrated in his pocket. An unknown number. He answered, his hand shaking for the first time in his life. "Where is she?" "She's lovely." "Luca." Marco's voice sneered, laced with triumphant hatred. "But she's bleeding on my floor. A pity. If you touch one hair on her head, I will—" "Silence," Marco snapped. "You're done, Moretti. Your little war is over. You burned my warehouses. I took your whore. What do you want?" Luca's voice was gravel, ice, and fire. "You, the old Castellano shipyard, Red Hook. You have 1 hour. Come alone, unarmed. We'll trade. If I see one of your men, if I hear a car, if I see a shadow, she dies. Walk in, or lose her." The line clicked dead. Luca stood frozen, the phone clutched in his hand. Antonio was at his side, his face pale. "Luca," Antonio pleaded, his voice low. "It's a trap. You know this. It's suicide. We can find another way." Luca looked at his oldest friend, his most trusted advisor. The cold, controlled mask of the boss was gone. His eyes were not cold. They were burning. He said nothing. He just shrugged off his tuxedo jacket, tossing it to the ground. He unclipped his tie. His movements fast, deliberate. He was already walking toward the exit, a man walking toward his own execution. And for the first time in his life, he was not afraid. Antonio stood in front of him, his face a mask of pale, desperate loyalty. "Luca, no, this is what he wants. It is a slaughter. It is not a trade. You know this." Luca was methodically unholstering his weapon. He placed the heavy, black firearm on the marble table of the gala's private office. He checked his ankle holster. He removed that, too. He emptied his pockets, keys, wallet, his phone. He put it all down. "You are the capo," Antonio pleaded, his voice cracking, something Luca had never heard in 40 years of service to his family. "You cannot do this. The family will not survive this. The family is yours. Antonio." Luca said. His voice was empty, hollowed out. The boss was gone, the kingpin, the reclusive billionaire. The man who had inherited the throne in blood, all of it was gone. All that was left was the man who had stood on a balcony in the rain, confessing his love. "If I am not back in 3 hours, you know what to do." "Luca, per l'amor di Dio, do not go," Antonio begged, grasping his arm. "Let us send the men. We will level the entire shipyard. We will find her. And she will be dead long before we get through the first door." Luca said. He looked at Ben, who stood nearby, his face grim and white. "No one follows me. That is a direct order. No one. Do you understand?" Ben nodded once, his jaw tight with a loyalty that was at war with his duty. Luca turned and walked away. He didn't run. He walked with a steady, relentless purpose, past the stunned gala attendees who were just beginning to realize something was wrong, past the valets, and into the night. He didn't take his car. He was a ghost, walking to his own grave. He hailed a cab, a simple, anonymous yellow car, and gave the driver an address in Red Hook, 2 blocks from the shipyard. The drive felt like 1,000 years and no time at all. He was unarmed. He was alone. He was going to save Elena, or he was going to die with her. There were no other options. Elena woke to the smell of rust and cold, damp salt, pain, a throbbing, dull agony at the back of her skull. Her mouth was dry, tasting of the chemical-soaked cloth Marco had used. She was tied to a chair. A single, bare bulb hung from a high, shadowed ceiling, illuminating a vast, cavernous space. A warehouse? The shipyard. She heard voices, echoing, distant. She was bleeding. She could feel a warm, wet trickle from her ear where Marco had struck her after dragging her from the car. "Just watch her," a voice grunted, much closer. "And don't mess this up. He'll be here in an hour." She kept her eyes slitted, feigning unconsciousness. A man sat on a crate not 10 feet away, idly flipping a switchblade, his gaze drifting toward the door. He was sloppy, bored. He was waiting for the main event. She tested the ropes. They were thick, biting into the skin of her wrists, but the chair was old, wooden, unsteady. She shifted her weight, a tiny, incremental movement. The man didn't look. She focused, her panic solidifying into a cold, hard rage. "I am not your weakness. I am your reason." She saw it, a piece of jagged, rusted metal, a leftover scrap from some old machine, lying on the concrete floor just beyond her foot. She waited. She timed his movements. He yawned, stretched, and turned his back for just a second to light a cigarette. Elena threw her entire body weight sideways. The chair toppled, crashing onto the concrete with a splintering crack. The impact sent a jolt of pain up her arm, the one she had scraped in the alley, but she ignored it. The man spun, swearing, the knife raised. "What the—" She was on the ground, still tied to the broken chair, but she was in motion. She kicked out, her heel connecting with his knee. He roared, stumbling. She rolled, desperate, ignoring the splinters, stretching her foot toward the metal shard. He lunged for her, his hand grabbing for her hair. "You stupid bitch!" She had the metal. It was sharp. She didn't have time to use it on the ropes. As he fell on top of her, his hand yanking her head back, she jammed the jagged, rusty end of the metal up, into his thigh. He screamed, a high, piercing sound, and recoiled, clutching his leg. Blood, dark in the dim light, gushed between his fingers. She was already rolling, trying to get her feet under her, sawing at the rope on her left wrist with the shard. She burst through a set of double doors and into another, darker section of the warehouse, her right hand still tied to a piece of the broken chair. She was free. She was running. A figure stepped out of the shadows. It was Marco. His suit was still immaculate. His smile was gone. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his fist connected with her jaw. The world exploded in white-hot pain, and she fell, recaptured. Her brief, desperate hope extinguished. He dragged her back to the center of the room, throwing her to the ground at the feet of the first guard, who was now tying a crude tourniquet around his bleeding leg. "Tie her to the pillar!" Marco snarled, his voice vibrating with rage. "And this time, use chains." Luca arrived at the shipyard gate. 2 of Marco's men were waiting. They searched him, their hands rough, invasive. They found nothing. "He's clean," one said, surprised. The other one, the larger of the 2, smiled. "He still needs a proper welcome." Marco said to make him presentable. He punched Luca in the stomach. Luca folded, the air leaving his lungs in a painful rush. The second man hit him in the kidney. They were methodical. They were punishing him for the burned warehouses, for the disrespect. They beat him for a full minute until his ribs ached and he was spitting blood onto the gravel. "That's enough," the first man said. "Marco wants him breathing." They dragged him, bloody and unarmed, into the main warehouse. Marco Castellano stood on a metal catwalk, 20 feet above the floor. He was illuminated from behind, a figure of pure, triumphant shadow. "Luca Moretti," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. "You look terrible. Not quite the reclusive kingpin, are you? Just a man bleeding in the dirt, all for a waitress." Luca said nothing. He just scanned the warehouse, his eyes desperate, searching, his heart a block of ice. Looking for someone, Marco taunted. He snapped his fingers. A floodlight flashed on, illuminating a steel support pillar 30 yards away. Elena was chained to it. She was conscious, barely. Her face was bruised, a fresh, dark contusion forming on her jaw. A cut was bleeding above her eye, and her red dress was torn. But she was alive. Her eyes, wide with terror and a desperate, defiant anger, found his, Luca. A sound tore from Luca's throat, a low, animalistic sound of pure rage and despair. He took a step toward her. Ah, Marco warned. He produced a pistol, aiming it not at Luca, but at Elena. One more step, and she dies. You came alone. You came unarmed. You sacrificed your kingdom, your family, your entire life for this, a broken piece of trash from Queens. Let her go, Marco, Luca said, his voice a low growl, thick with the blood in his mouth. This is between you and me. It always has been. It was. Marco agreed, walking down the metal stairs, his steps casual, his confidence absolute. It was about families, about business, about respect, but you made it about her. You burned my assets. You attacked my men, all for her. You showed me your weakness, Luca, and now you're going to watch me destroy it. He leveled the gun at Luca's head. And then, I'm going to destroy you. You first, I think, so she can watch you fall. Marco centered the gun on Luca's forehead. Luca didn't flinch. He just held Elena's gaze. I'm sorry, his eyes said. Elena screamed. No! The sound of the first gunshot was not from Marco's pistol. It was the sound of a high-caliber rifle. Shattering the windows high above, glass rained down. What is this? Marco yelled, spinning around in disbelief. I said alone! The massive, rolling metal door of the warehouse exploded inward. Flying off its tracks, an armored black SUV smashed through it, its headlights blinding, followed by two more. Floodlights from the vehicles illuminated the entire warehouse, catching Marco and his 10 men in a blinding crossfire. Moretti, now! A voice roared over a loudspeaker. It was Antonio. Luca's men, black-clad and heavily armed, poured out of the vehicles. A brutal, deafening shootout erupted. The warehouse became a war zone of muzzle flashes, shouting, and the metallic ping of bullets ricocheting off steel. Marco, his face a mask of disbelief and fury, fired wildly at the attacking force before turning. His primary objective clear. He ran toward Elena, his gun raised, but Luca was already moving. He was unarmed, but he was a weapon. He grabbed the nearest of Marco's men who was firing at the SUVs and used him as a human shield. Bullets tore into the man's back. Luca let the body drop. Taking the man's sidearm in the same fluid, practiced motion. He didn't join the main fight. He ran straight for Elena, firing at the two guards who were pulling her, trying to drag her into a side office. He hit one. The other turned, firing back. Luca felt a searing, white-hot pain tear through his left shoulder. The impact spun him around, but he didn't fall. He raised his gun and fired twice, his expression one of pure, cold focus. The second guard dropped. He reached Elena as Marco, seeing his escape cut off by Ben, was turning to flee through a side door. Luca ignored him. He dropped the gun and fumbled with the chains, his hand slick with his own blood. "Elena!" he breathed, his voice raw. "You're bleeding!" She sobbed, her hands going to his face. "Luca, you're shot!" He found the key on one of the guards, his fingers clumsy, his shoulder screaming. The chains clattered to the floor. She fell into him, her legs giving out. He caught her, cradling her against his chest, shielding her body with his own as the firefight raged around them. He dragged her behind the steel pillar, out of the line of fire. He held her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping the blood and tears from her cheeks. She was shaking, her eyes wide with shock. "You came," she whispered, her voice broken. "You came alone. It was a suicide mission. I would burn the world for you," he whispered, his voice thick with a lifetime of pain. He pressed his forehead against hers. "You are not my weakness, Elena. You're the only thing keeping me human. We have to go." Ben was there, appearing from the smoke, his rifle raised. "The building is hot. Antonio has a car." Luca nodded, his face pale, his arm hanging uselessly. He scooped Elena up, his one good arm locking around her waist, and pulled her toward the exit. They burst out into the night air. The war was over. Marco was gone, vanished in the chaos. Luca's men were consolidating, hurting the surviving Castellano gunmen. A single shot rang out from the darkness of the shipyard. Marco. He was on the roof of an adjacent building, a sniper rifle in his hand. It was aimed at Elena. Luca saw it. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He threw himself in front of her, shoving her to the ground. The bullet, meant for her heart, slammed into his back, just below the shoulder he'd already injured. The pain was absolute. A bright, agonizing explosion that stole his breath and his sight. He collapsed on top of her. "Luca!" she screamed, her voice a sound of pure, primal terror. Ben and Antonio were on him, dragging him, pulling him. "Man down! Get him in the car! Go! Go!" The world dissolved for Luca into a blur of faces, pain, and Elena's screams. The hospital was private, expensive, and owned by a man who owed Luca Moretti his life. There were no police. Just Antonio's men, standing guard at every door. Elena sat in the chair by his bed. She had not left it in 2 days. They had told her he was lucky. The first bullet had gone clean through the flesh of his shoulder. The second, the one from the rifle, had missed his spine by less than an inch, shattering a rib. He was alive. He was in a deep, medicated sleep. She had showered in the private bathroom, but she refused to change out of the scrubs a nurse had given her. She was a sentry, a guardian. She watched him sleep, his face pale beneath the dark stubble. He looked younger, vulnerable. The monster was gone. The kingpin was gone. It was just Luca. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and traced the old, faded scar on his chest, a pale white line from a different, older fight. She thought of the story of his brother, of the boy forged into a weapon. She cried silently, her tears falling onto his hand, which she held tightly in her own. On the morning of the 3rd day, his fingers twitched. Elena's head snapped up. She'd been dozing, her head on the mattress. His eyes fluttered. They opened, unfocused, then slowly cleared. He looked around the sterile room, and then his gaze found her. He was groggy, his lips chapped. He tried to speak. "Hey," she whispered, her voice cracking. She stood, leaning over him, brushing the damp hair from his forehead. "Hey, you're okay. You're safe. I'm right here." He looked at her, at the dried tear tracks on her cheeks, at the fierce loyalty in her red-rimmed eyes. A shadow of a smile, a tiny, pained quirk of his lips, appeared. He swallowed, his voice a dry rasp, a bare whisper. "Don't flirt with men like me." He breathed, a sob, a laugh, a sound of pure, agonizing relief escaped her. Tears streamed down her face, but this time, they were not for his pain. They were for his return. She leaned down, her lips brushing his ear, her voice shaking but strong. "Too late," she whispered. "I'm in love with one." He lifted his good hand, his movements slow, pained, and tangled it in her hair, pulling her down. Their mouths met. It was not a kiss of passion or desperation. It was a kiss of survival. It was salty with their combined tears, trembling with the shock of his return and the depth of her relief. It was a promise, made in the quiet of a hospital room, that the war was over, and they had, against all odds, won. 6 weeks. It had been 6 weeks since the night of the shipyard. Luca's body was healing. The heavy, rigid brace that had immobilized his shoulder and back was gone, replaced by a simple black sling that he wore. Almost reluctantly, over his expensive casual shirts, he moved stiffly, the pain a constant, low thrum beneath the surface, but his strength was returning. The wounds to his world, however, were deeper. The war was not over. Marco Castellano had vanished in the chaos of that night, a ghost, but his family, what remained of it, was in disarray. They were a serpent without a head, lashing out in disorganized, vengeful strikes. They were still dangerous. Luca stood in his study, his good arm resting on the desk, staring out the glass wall at the city he had once commanded. Elena watched him from the doorway. He was a king, restless and weary, in a kingdom he no longer wanted. Antonio entered the room, his face etched with the same exhaustion they all felt. He held a tablet. "Boss," Antonio said, his voice clipped. "The Castellano cousins hit our shipping containers in Jersey. It was sloppy, but they did significant damage. They are demanding a meeting. They want—" "It doesn't matter what they demand," Luca interrupted. His voice was quiet, lacking the cold, sharp authority of the past. It was heavy, hollowed out. He turned, his dark eyes finding Antonio's. "It's yours, Antonio." The older man froze, the tablet in his hand lowered. "Boss, what are you saying?" "The family," Luca said, his voice clear and final. "The business, the throne, the revenge, it's all yours." Elena stepped fully into the room, her hand pressed to her mouth. She had known this was coming, but the finality of it stole her breath. "Luca, you cannot be serious," Antonio whispered, his disbelief warring with a lifetime of loyalty. "You are the capo. You are a Moretti. You do not—" "Retire." "I am," Luca said. He looked at Elena, and the coldness in his eyes dissolved, replaced by a warmth that was for her alone. "This," he gestured to the city below, "this world, it is a cancer. It took my brother. It almost took me. It will not take her." He turned his gaze back to his consigliere. "They want Moretti blood. They will not stop. They will hunt me, and they will hunt her, until they have it. But if the Moretti blood is no longer in power, if the assets are transferred, if the name itself becomes a ghost, the war becomes meaningless. It becomes your business to finish. Antonio, on your terms." "You would give it all up," Antonio said, the words barely audible. "Everything your father built for her?" "My father built a prison," Luca said, his voice hard. "I am not giving anything up. I am choosing what matters. You have served this family, served me, with more loyalty than my own blood. You taught me strategy when my father taught me only brutality. You will lead." It was an abdication. It was not a request. He was handing his most trusted man the keys to the underworld. He was erasing himself from the board, a king sacrificing himself to save his queen. Antonio, stunned, looked at the floor, and then, after a long, heavy silence, he nodded once. The transfer of power was complete. 3 months later, the scent of dark roast coffee and freshly baked bread filled the bright, airy space. Sunlight streamed through tall, immaculate windows, illuminating the clean white tiles and warm, wooden tables. On the glass door, in elegant, understated gold leaf, the sign read, "The Carter Cafe." It was everything the diner was not. It was hope. It was peace. It was hers. Elena tied the knot on her simple, gray apron, a feeling of profound, surreal joy settling over her. Luca's money had funded it, a silent, anonymous investment from a shell corporation. But the design, the menu, the soul of the place, this was all her. The bell above the door chimed, a gentle, welcoming sound. "Welcome to the Carter," she called out, turning from the gleaming, complex espresso machine. Nathan Carter smiled, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jeans. "I'll take one of whatever the boss is making. I hear she's good." Elena dropped the portafilter. It clattered onto the counter. She stared. He was standing. He was walking. He had a slight limp, one that might never fully leave, but he was here, on his own 2 feet. She ran from behind the counter and threw her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder, her tears immediate and hot. He was solid. He was real. "You're walking," she sobbed, clinging to him. "Nathan, you're really walking." He held her tight, his old, familiar strength returning to his arms. "I'm walking, and you—" He pulled back, his own eyes wet as he looked around the beautiful, bustling cafe. "Elle, look at this place. You did it." "We did it," she corrected, wiping her face. "No," he said, his gaze serious, full of a new understanding. "You did. I don't know what you went through to get here, Elle, but you did it." She looked around at the life she had built from the ashes of the old one. Luca had not just saved her brother, He had given him the best surgeons, the best care in the country. He had given her back her family. "It's a start," she whispered. "It's more than that," Nathan said, putting an arm around her. "It's a second chance." They lived quietly. Luca had bought a new property, a secure, modern house upstate, nestled in acres of forest, far from the city, but they kept the penthouse. It was their fortress, their first home. Elena ran the cafe. Luca, now officially retired, returned to his photography. He was, to the world, just the reclusive, eccentric artist he had always pretended to be. But the past was not a switch to be flipped. The darkness was still in him. Elena would see it, in the quiet moments. They would be reading by the fire in the penthouse, the city a silent, glittering jewel below, and his gaze would go distant. His hand would clench into a fist, as if gripping a weapon that was no longer there. His jaw would set. The boss, the warrior, the man forged in blood, was still inside, a lion pacing a cage of his own making. She would go to him, climb into his lap, and press her hand to his cheek. He would startle. A tiny, almost impearl, "I'm not a good subject," he teased. "You're a terrible subject. You're always brooding." She snapped a picture. The click of the shutter was a satisfying, final sound. He laughed, a low, warm rumble that she loved. He walked over to her, pulling her to her feet. He took the camera from her, setting it carefully in the grass. He looped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "You sure you want to flirt with a man like me?" he whispered, his voice a perfect imitation of that cold, dismissive tone he'd used on the rooftop, what felt like a lifetime ago. Elena smiled, tilting her head back to look into his dark eyes, which were no longer cold, but filled only with her. "I married him," she said. He kissed her, and she laughed against his lips, the sound of her joy mixing with the buzz of the summer insects and the rustle of the leaves in their quiet, peaceful garden. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We hope you enjoyed the journey of Elena and Luca. Where in the world are you listening from? Let us know in the comments below for more stories just like this. Make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories. We would love to hear your thoughts, so please share them in English.